Good ol' howdy hello to ya. My name is Samantha Eaton, and this is our presentation of Education in the Nonprofit Sector. This class is BA 480, Introduction to Nonprofit Organizations, and our professor is Dr. Rebecca Williams. We're going to be going over, and I'm going to give you a little overview in the table of contents. First off, there's that video link. Please click on it because it makes things more fun. I'm pretty engaging, you're excited, you're listening, we're playing. Let's learn about education in the nonprofit sector. Boom. So in our table of contents, we're actually going to start off with the role and significance, leading to the size and sector dynamics, followed by the history of this education and the nonprofit sector. Then we're going to look at the current and future trends, find key examples of nonprofits in our local area or outstretching further. And then lastly, summative thoughts by yours truly. All right, let's kick this off with role and significance. What I wanted to start off our role and significance area with is our collective definition of what a nonprofit organization will be. Grobman, our 2020 author of the Introduction to Nonprofit Organizations textbook, mentioned that nonprofit organizations are the institutions that stand between the individual and the government. The reason why I think this is so accurate is threefold. Nonprofit organizations have to have a couple of things to be nonprofit. Have a mission to serve the public. The biggest part of it is that it has no private gain. Any revenue that they may get goes right back into the services that they offer their community. And that's actually what they're all about, to serve the public in whatever capacity they have their specific mission that they may do. And thirdly, their practices are value-driven. These nonprofit organizations are the ones who stand in between the individual and the government. And by saying that, they almost act as a mediator. They act as a translator. They act as a mentor or a guide or some type of wizard who brings you through to the other side. Because the nonprofit organization, just like our common wizard, wants to serve the public, have resources, and they have knowledge bases that individuals from any walk of life can come in and hopefully get some access further. And I think that's what Grobman is kind of trying to bring forward in that statement. They're the middlemen to make sure you can get where you want to go. And sometimes that's facilitating knowledge, sometimes that's helping you grow skill sets, sometimes that's creating access to different opportunities, jobs, or anything like that. It's not for private gain. Do you think that Gandalf actually gets paid for any of the stuff that he does? No. In addition, he's driven off of values, you know? It's all about the morals. It's about the ethics. It's about the community improvement. Next, the role of education within nonprofits. Martin Luther King Jr. had a beautiful way to explain the integral role that education has in our world, and specifically in our lives. He stated, education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. The complete education gives one not only the power of concentration, but worthy objectives upon which to concentrate. All of those beautiful depictions of what education means to our world. It is the moral compass in which we work by. It is our discernment from deciding if something is good or bad, or if it's real or fake, a delusion or an illusion. It's what is it? Education gives people the discernment to choose. Nonprofits specifically helping education gives a little bit more access to that. They fill in the gaps. When a district doesn't have the ability to have proper budgeting for or funding for, let's say, books in your library, There are nonprofits who specialize in education and want to fill your libraries with books. They want to help out those teachers who are struggling to fill out their classrooms. They want to find support for the families that are around that may not have the access to tutoring, to proper food, to safe home. In the simplest of ways, nonprofit organizations bridge the gap. They strengthen community through learning because they get to learn together. They get to have a shared experience. It's like storytelling. It's one of the best ways to connect with someone because hopefully, in some way, whether they resonate with your story or not, they may resonate with an emotion. And in education and nonprofits, it's creating the access. So whether or not it's specifically what they're targeting, they create the community, and that brings everything further. Firstly, we're going to go over theory of the commons. This one has to do with shared resources, understanding the me and the we, and how they kind of play against each other and for each other. I'll read you my summary. The theory of the commons reframes the nonprofit sector as a living expression of the community. These organizations become communal spaces that are molded by voluntary engagement and shared purpose, evolving our efforts and action into a collective stewardship that nurtures belonging, ethical reciprocity, and the quiet connection of community. The flip side of this beautiful depiction of shared responsibility or stewardship for resources that are shared is the tragedy of the commons. The most classic example I have heard for this is overfishing. So imagine this. You see a beautiful clear lake, and you and your entire village actually come up on this, and you're like, wow, there are so many fishies. Wow, this is beautiful weather. Wow, we are in the optimal zone. Cool. Everybody goes back home. Well, me, the selfish one. I grab my fishing gear and I go out there and I just start fishing. Because you know what? Like, I want to gain some money for my household. I want to bring in the dough. I want to bring in the yums. I want to make sure that we'll be set for our hibernating season of winter. And so I'm just going to prepare. So you know what? I'm just going to keep doing it. Well, when I'm doing that, we're going to set me aside for a second. We have a couple more people who are doing that. So me and my buddies are actually doing that. We'll set those all aside. That's when we focus back to the other people in the town. When they go out, they notice that they're getting less and less bites on their fishing line. And when they do a population check, because obviously this is the society that we live in, they notice that all of the populations of fish have gone down to a point where they can't repopulate in the amount of time that we're just taking, depleting them from the lake. So ultimately, when we look back at me and my friends who were just fishing and we were just trying to protect ourselves, we took away the shared resource from all of the other people. So they were at a disadvantage, our resource was depleted, and then there was a select few who were hoarding the goods. Ultimately, there is a lesson in this, though. When something belongs to everyone, like the fish in the lake, we have to take what we need and leave enough for others. This ensures that all are taken care of in the long term. I wanted to pair Rawls' principles of justice with our theory of the commons. The reason why is because this creates a holistic sense of why we have this incentive to create community and sustain that connection. Rawls' principles of justice are supported by 3 different aspects. The first of which is equal claim to liberty. The second is equal claim to opportunity. And the third is that favor should run towards the disadvantage. In this, what we really and truly see is where individuals start to prioritize becoming impartial in their viewpoint and actually start protecting disadvantaged members of society. So when we go further and we actually look at how will nonprofits truly endure, we pair the theory of the commons and we pair these principles of justice, and what we get is this beautiful definition of why nonprofits should always exist and why they will always exist. And that is, nonprofits provide voluntary spaces for individuals to exercise their privilege of civic engagement, for collective problem solving, and for the common good. Next, size and sector dynamics. First, we're going to start off and see what the entire nonprofit sector is built out of, and that's 300,000 organizations. And further, they employ 12.8 million individuals. And when we go past that, we also see that they are allocated $3.5 trillion yearly. I did also want to point out that they have this rule where they do 70% of their profit or their income, which again, they're non-profit, so it goes back in, but their rule is the 70% goes back into the organization and its services, and then the 15% go into operational things, and then 15% goes into like funding and advertising and getting word out there. So funding opportunities like that. So 70, 15, 100% of the money is accounted for. When we look at portioning out specifically all of these resources, the 12.9 million people, the $3.5 trillion, we're going to focus specifically on how it's pied out. When we section off the nonprofit sector, we find a couple different areas. First, we find the health and human services being at the top at 35% of all of the resources primarily go there, right? Next, it's education, which is the one we're going to be doing, followed by arts, culture, and humanities, then faith-based organizations, environmental and animal welfare, and then finally international relief and advocacy. When we further in and we look directly at our educational sector dynamics, we notice that they actually follow an 80-10-10 rule, which is even cooler than the 70-15-15 or the 70-20-10. And the reason is all profits that they get almost entirely goes back out. They have a couple operational fees and a couple times where they try to fund further. And other than that, it goes right back in. When we looked at the 2.9 million individuals who are employed in the education nonprofit sector, we actually found out further that in the entire private sector of educational service roles, 80.8% of those roles are filled by individuals in the nonprofit sector. So overall, nonprofit educational value is just going up and up and up and up. And I don't know where that private sector went, but nonprofit sector is coming in clutch. Next, we're going to go over our history or our history factoids. We're going to go back to our ancient lands and see a couple of ways that we had the ideas or sense of a nonprofit, that moral obligation to our humankind. We're going to notice that in America specifically, we actually started to gain more legal standing and stability in the 1830s. You really start to see things really explode because in 1913, the federal tax exemption actually went through. And so philanthropy, educational resources, universities, research and academia, all of these things started to skyrocket after 1913 because they were like, tax exempt, let's get on it. Why not do that now? In the education sector, you also see a resurgence in 1944 when the GI Bill was passed that actually add a further emphasis to show that the nonprofit sector was actually building more importance to the higher education. And so it was kind of creating this balance back in the 1940s where it was bringing back the idea that education should always be here. Next, we're going to look at our ancient examples like Egypt and Greece and see how our past actually influences our present and future. When we looked at ancient Egypt, we found that society was built through the principle of Mat, or Mahat. I do not know the pronunciation, so I am sorry. Is the moral principle that emphasizes harmony and justice and well-being of others. It was that outstretch of the hand. If someone was in need, you actually went to help them. This also helped in prioritizing ethical teachings and specifically working towards the collective good. When we look at ancient Greece, we actually see something a little bit further, which is different contributions that were almost required, morally required. They were called liturgies. And they funded all sorts of public events like theaters or creating like civic spaces and stuff like that. And sometimes even funding war. But really and truly, it's the point of giving back. Can you think of any other past events that may influence our present and future? Where we see each other as equals and we're just there to help, you know? So that's something to pose to you. Our educational value within the nonprofit sector kind of boils down to these three different gears that keep us moving, which is it cultivates community and lifelong learning. In addition, it innovates teaching and different types of learning models, and it also expands access to learning, which even further just strengthens community learning. First, we're going to do a slight overview. The sum of the times. We're just looking at a few of the different trends that have truly emerged and that we're going to have to deal with moving forward. That is a standard level of expectation. In addition, increased collaboration. Another one is diversification of revenue. And lastly is building organizational capacity. First, we're going to start off with our standard of expectations. As historical shifts are happening and we're moving towards like wanting that kind of like structure or framework that we can like rely on and move forward with, we're looking to also make our space more professional. So with that structure, we see more professionalization. And in this, we're actually aligning with our frameworks and our curricula, promoting the nonprofit standards like NACC already brings in. Next, as there becomes a growing need for accountability and collaboration, that's when I feel like those two theories come into play. Because if we focus through Rawls' principles of justice, we see the fairness brought in through society in a way that we can actually enact. And then if we blend it through the theory of the commons, we get a sense of understanding that we take what we need and we don't get too greedy. Adding those two theories together ensures that we are keeping resources for all, but also making sure everybody has equal opportunity to liberty and resources and everything in turn. So making them together allows for better collaboration and stronger accountability, which is just fun. Next, we do have the diversification of revenue. This comes in a lot of different ways, especially after like COVID hit. Everybody kind of had to find different ways to utilize their income and to gain income. And the nonprofit sector definitely took a slight hit. With this impact that the nonprofit sector saw, that's where we see the trend or the need of wanting to diversify our revenue. The nonprofit sector has a couple ways of doing this. They can call back to past participants and collaborators and try to regain or deepen connections that are already there. They may seek out and find new collaborators to work with. They may go for new funding and grants specifically, which is a lot of grant writing, but you know, power to you. I think you're a champ if you're doing that. And Also, it could be like giving new services from your organization, but even like smaller things that bring in technical aspects, offering workshops online that are available that someone just clicks, one-time fee streaming sites. Some things like that allow for a little bit of a diversification of where our resources come into play. Lastly, we are going to check out the trend of needing to build organizational capacity. This is like when we analyze our data and we realize what pitfalls happen or what patterns there are, and we see, oh, if we fix this little thing and we continue forward, that may improve it. And specifically when we embed reflective practices that hail back to our mission statement, this just brings us back further into building our capacity by using new tools, by gaining skill sets, by collaborating more, and by gaining the data, by going through what we have and making sure we can build it to make it better. 3 actionable steps that nonprofit organizations could kind of go towards to make sure that they're really set up for the future. Emphasize that storytelling ability, share your narrative. This deepens trust. This builds a shared narrative, which creates connection and engagement within community, allows for more collaborative potential because you're already creating that shared sense. Next is aligning our actions with our mission and our value. It's all the same. The nonprofit sector has to move with intent and integrity. Lastly, it is just best to be transparent with your communication. Have strong internal communication within your organization and further it by showing it to the community. The building of that trust and encouraging ethical practices to navigate complicated changes that may arise. In our examples of nonprofits, we're going to start off with the North Clackamas Education Foundation, so NCEF. It serves over 17,000 students across 32 different schools. One interesting thing about this organization is that it not only goes for the community and educational build, but also for the family and community support, which some usually specialize in one or the other, right? Humanities services or education, but this one makes sure to bring them close together. It allows for a lot of individuals to get new books in their library if they need that, to get school supplies, to get tutoring services, even just mental health services. These are individuals who can provide that access and that intermediate. They are that actor between the person and the government. They act as that translator, that mediator, and that resource finder. Our next example is 826 National. 826 National emphasizes educational and literacy build. They host workshops. They publish young authors' works all across the United States. It has about 8 different locations, and they serve over 900,000 different students and 23,000 different educators. That's a lot. It's a lot. Some of the services that they offer is hosting writing clinics and helping with literacy standards, specifically teaching individuals how to read and write, how to bolster their voice, how to show their advocacy, looking into their passions, research abilities. Even further, they actually publish young authors' works, which truly just validates and shares their story, emphasizing that storyteller aspect and really bolstering the community in this most simple of ways. Nonprofits like 826 National teach young writers that storytelling is an act of contribution to their community. It is their civic duty. It's like voting or standing on a jury. It is the fact that you are contributing your voice and adding to the collective understanding. In our summative thoughts, we're going to go back to our nonprofit organization definition, and it is the institution that stands between the individual and the government, allowing for that access to be had. They serve the community. They're driven by morals. and they're not for profit. They're actually for the community. I had a professor named Dr. Jeremy Carlton tell me a line by Cornel West. Love is what justice looks like in public. That line rings in my head in a crazy way. And it's because a world in which you can secure that equality and that ability to be seen and protected, that's a world to live in. And we go back to Martin Luther King Jr. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. Because ultimately, we're here to build community. That's what a nonprofit does. And a nonprofit with an emphasis in education wants you to learn. So, be curious and live creatively. Stay curious.